Attention, please. Eastern Airlines Flight 19, now ready for departure.
Welcome aboard the Walt Disney World Express monorail. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're entering the vacation kingdom of the world.
There's enough land here to hold all the ideas and plans we could possibly imagine. We call it Epcot. Will be our experimental prototype city of tomorrow.
Welcome to another episode of the Retro Disney World Podcast, taking you back to the vacation kingdom of the world, the way it was, and the way it is in your memories.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Retro Disney World Podcast. I'm your host, Todd McCartney, and welcome to episode 32, Riding on Sunshine, where we're going to take you back to the universe of energy. I know we're saying goodbye to that building, but before we get to that, Hal Bowers, who is finally cooling down in Tampa after a bout of HVAC problems in the household there.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means, but it's true.
Feeling cooler now?
Yes, we have a new air conditioning system, so I don't know why I'm rubbing my hands like,
You're making heat.
Yeah. I have a new air conditioning
He's
system.
rubbing his hands trying to come up with the cash to pay.
That is absolutely true. But
And piping in there from Pennsylvania is Mr. Brian P. Miles.
Greetings and salutations from Pennsylvania, the Keystone State.
There we go. And Mr. JT Kuzier coming in from Ohio. How you doing tonight, JT?
We're doing good. The AC's pumping. You might be able to hear it in the background.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're good.
Which reminds me, I gotta shut mine off here, so get that background noise out of here. Microphones are just too sensitive. So.
Yeah, they are.
I think it's appropriate to have that background noise in the Universe of Energy episode.
That's right. Yeah, we're using energy, air
I
cooling.
would like to add I have an energy drink tonight for the episode.
Oh,
See
very nice.
that? Took a page out of Howe's book there.
fantastic.
Yeah, look at that.
Nicely done.
Well, as always, we go over comments and corrections before we get to listener mail. But tonight we're gonna put the comments and corrections together along with the listener mail because there were so many comments and different questions that came back regarding our episode last month, which was Mission to Mars. Guys, it's been a while since we recorded. I think everybody's been on vacation and whatnot, so we're finally getting here our next episode. So we had a lot of time for different questions to come in, and we got quite a bit. So JT, you've got the mailbag and different things that came in. What do we got there?
It's huge this month or month and a half. I'll preface by saying a lot of positive feedback on Mission to Mars. I was kind of pleasantly surprised by that because it was one, obviously, like most of these subjects, it was new to me and the listeners. I was impressed, to say that we had a lot of good feedback. First one just was a comment correction from Mark Sheffield. He said he really enjoyed the podcast. He wasn't sure if he missed it, but he wondered if we mentioned the subtle throw out to the Imagineers in Tomorrowland, Flight of the Moon, Mission to Mars that's there today in Tomorrowland. Does anybody remember that?
Yeah,
possibly?
We did not mention it on the episode, probably because I think this is pretty well known, but for those of you who have not heard it, it bears to mention. There is a mention of both Tom Morrow and Mr. Johnson on the Wedway People Mover as your, one of them is, I believe it's when you're going over the Grand Prix or the Tomorrowland Speedway. They're talking about the traffic, and I'm trying to remember where the other mention of
It might be on the way out of Space Mountain. It might be.
I remember it's like in a tunnel. I feel like you hear it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, is it the Tom
Like
Morrow? It's
under.
like your party from Saturn has arrived. Give him a ring.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So yep. So they slid in a little tribute to both characters there.
Yep. So thank you, Mark. Mark and I randomly chatted on the Facebook, and he's a pretty cool guy. So appreciate the note, Mark. Next one I have here is from Joe Streckless. He says, enjoyed the Mission to Mars episode and have a question hoping we know the answer to. He says he was On the ride back in the late 80s, he remembers thinking that the commander and the dad in Carousel of Progress were the same guy. We were joking that he worked at Mission to Mars and after work went home to the carousel. Did the commander actually look like the dad in the carousel, or were they just really bad at telling audio animatronic figures apart?
And that is actually a pretty common thing. I've heard that multiple times. He's not the first person to think that. So I got as good picture as I could of the dad from the Carousel Progress and Mr. Johnson and put him side by side. Oh, and I will correct myself from last month, because as I tweeted out after we finished our episode, I spent the entire episode calling the character Dr. Johnson when he's really just Mr. Johnson. So I guess he was never a doctor. He was always just a mystery.
Not quite there yet.
Yeah, he didn't get his PhD or whatever. So
He's going to a correspondence school.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's going to night school after the park closes.
So I got the best photos I could. And although there are some similarities, certainly I think the mustache is the thing that kind of makes him look alike. I will maintain that their faces are different. From certain angles, it's more apparent than others, but it is not the same figure, in my opinion.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe, for that. Next one I have here is from Richard. Richard said that he really enjoys the podcast. He grew up in L.A. and having gone to Disneyland regularly since 1970. He was on Flight to the Moon and Mission to Mars many times, and it was fun to hear us describe the ride as cheesy hydraulic seats, having cheesy hydraulic seats. It's pretty accurate, though. So he has a question. In 1967, Tomorrowland was rebuilt, but they did not change the takeoff film that was projected onto the floor. His brother recognized this. They were supposed to be taking off from Disneyland, but I didn't recognize the old configuration of buildings, that sort of thing. And he says they also used the exact same liftoff sequence from Mission to Mars from Flight to the Moon. So basically, he's asking, did the liftoff scene ever change at Disneyland, and did they actually do a Disney World one in Florida?
So the answer is no. They use the exact same footage from the Disneyland version in the Disney World version, and that was one of the things that surprised me. But I actually thought I have a false memory of them showing the state of Florida. But we went back in research for the show, and they show what looks like the Disneyland Flight to the Moon building in a complex that isn't Disneyland. It looks more like a space complex, but it has the same shape. And then, so it lifts off from there, and then it goes through some clouds, and then it's sort of this generic, somewhat of a coastline, but it's still so close up you can't make an outline of it. And to me, it could look like Southern California. It could look like almost anywhere.
And depending on which side of the circle you're sitting on, it could look like the East Coast or the West Coast.
Yeah. So
there's really no way to tell.
True.
Yeah. But there was no distinct like shape of Florida or anything that you saw at any point taking off, which it was actually really surprising. So nope, same exact. And as they said, when you landed, they literally just played the film backwards, and you came into the same location. It's so amazingly cheesy.
Which is the same for our upper scanner film that we released. The same thing, right? That the ascent is the same as the descent as well.
Yeah,
on the upper screen. So
I mean, I guess you didn't have to do it twice or make it different. It's just it's all the same.
All right, so thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. Next one I have here is a little change of pace. It's a Hall of Presidents question. We got this from Michael Yarum on Twitter. He says, have you ever seen an outline of the changes in placement of the Hall of Presidents, of the different presidents, on stage? And how we asked him this one and how just instantly knew the answer. I was super impressed with how it was just instant knowledge on this. So tell us what you know.
So if you want to know what the original placement was, if you happen to get yourself a copy of the Hall of Presidents LP, that was sold in the parks as a souvenir in the 1970s.
That's a long playing vinyl record for those of you too young to remember them.
33 and a third speed, the But you know what? Everybody's into vinyl now, Brian. So now is a great time to like.
I have it in the other room. I have the Hall of Presidents record in the other room.
What's on it? Just the audio from the show, or?
Yeah, basically, it's the original show was heavy on Lincoln and
Yes.
Back in my day, we had desks and people would sit at them and write letters.
That's what you say, you tall drink of water. I remember this.
Oh yeah, the angry crowd. Yeah.
That's right. That's what I say. So it has the entire show, the whole film, and then the Hall of Presidents roll call, and then on the back I think there's some patriotic songs. Mine Eyes Seen the Glory, all that stuff. But inside of that, it comes with a like a gatefold sort of booklet in the center, like an 11-page booklet. And inside of that booklet, on one of the pages, is actually a 2-page spread that shows a picture of the stage, and down in the bottom is a little diagram with the names of all the presidents and a little number, so you can tell which president is which. So at least for that version that exists, I don't know if anybody has done it for the redo during the Clinton era and then the Obama era and those changes, and then the Bushes and whatnot. Because every time a new president came in, obviously they needed to rearrange all these guys. So somewhere, I guess if you sat down with Flickr and started going through all the different versions, you could probably figure that out. But at least we have a good starting point.
So that is going to conclude our mailbag, comments, corrections, all that stuff. Thank you so much for writing us. If it didn't make the show, continue please to write us with what you want to know, maybe different things that pop up in your brain, memories from the show. Podcast at RetroWDW.com. Send us a tweet with your questions, direct message, anything like that. We will do our best to answer your questions and get back to you.
All right, well, it's time for this month's audio rewind puzzler, and how you produced last month's episode, and you chose something that kind of gave listeners a hint that we were going to be going back to Universe of Energy. So let's take a listen to last month's audio rewind. All right, and if you guessed Universe of Energy, you are correct. Which portion of the song was that?
That was the very beginning of the song, right? That's the very first noise as you're watching the movie. It's like we'll talk about this. It's like there's kind of like this picture of the universe that spins up, and that sound effect accompanies that, and then the song begins.
There we go. So, congratulations to Jessica Polarski. You are a winner this month, so congratulations.
Yeah, Jessica.
Yeah, you'll be receiving postcards, which are a thank you to David Eppen for providing. So a bunch of retro Disney postcards from the early years. We'll get that out to you. And that means we need a prize for this month. And we've got a little ephemera to throw in here. We're gonna throw in a pack of our pins that we've got, but we're also throwing in, this is a photo envelope. So if you still have some film, you might be able to drop it off somewhere in the park, and hopefully by the time you arrive at home, your 35 millimeter, or who knows, maybe even have a 110 or a 124 film might just be developed to be ready by the time you get home. So if you'd like to try and get that prize for this month, let's take a listen to this month's Audio Rewind Puzzler. All right, if you think you know the answer to this month's Audio Rewind, send your answers to podcast at RetroWDW.com. All entries should be received by September 4th, 2017. All correct entries will be entered into a random drawing to see who wins this month's prize. And as always, every entry, regardless if they're correct or not, will be entered into our prize pot. Now, JT, you've been keeping track of the prize pot, right?
Yeah, we've got a solid one item so far for prize pot phase 2.
Yep. And what's in there so far?
Right now we have that very famous 1971 Life magazine that features the castle and the big crowd, the whole deal on there. So
that's a good one. All right, so I've got something here from the mystery drawer. I have the April 6, 1971 Look magazine with Mickey on the cover. This will accompany the Life magazine really, really well. So it's got some great articles in here on the opening of Disney World. And it's got some little very basic maps. A lot of people having fun on a random beach that is nowhere near Florida, or nowhere near Orlando, I should say. And so we'll add that in there. So JT, make sure that gets added to the prize pot.
Noted.
Got that down. We'll be drawing the winner for the prize pot in December 2017.
I think it's probably an appropriate time, now that we've just finished comments and corrections and the audio rewind, to mention the consistent and growing number of people who email and Twitter at us and Facebook at us, who have been discovering us and listening to the back catalog of almost 4 years worth of episodes here. Yeah. And I think the guys would agree. We probably get 1 or 2 emails a week from someone who says, I just found your show and I'm rapidly listening and re-listening to, the years worth of podcasts. And so while we're sorry that you can't enter the old audio rewinds, we do appreciate every now and then when you guys throw in an answer in your emails, or when you ask us a question from 3 years ago and we all have to pause and say, I don't remember. We'll have to go look.
Yeah, or which episode did we talk about that on?
Yeah, but thank you. And yeah, that's always a help. If you're going to write to us about a former episode, if you can remind us which episode it was, yep, that's a help. But thank you for writing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for re-listening. And we think we're more interesting today than we were back then. But
I think we sound
polished.
Yeah, we sound a little better.
I think it's crazy, though, to think you could have a binge listener out there. Like, they discover one and they just download them all.
And for new listeners, or even old listeners who may not remember what a specific, say, oh, when did they talk about Journey into Imagination? Or when did they talk about MGM Studios? If you go to our website, we have a new page now. If you go to our website, go up to the podcast menu, and the second option is episodes by topic and area. And what we've done is we've sorted all of our episodes by the area in Walt Disney World where they took place. If you want to see if we've done an episode on a particular attraction, that's the best way to find it. Or if you're doing research and you want to take a listen to something specific, check that out. So again, just go to our website, RetroWDW.com, and it's in the podcast menu. All right, well, it's time to take you back to the universe of energy. And I know some of you are probably sitting there going, "What? Wait, I thought you were going to journey into imagination this month." And yes, we were going to. And then when the final announcement came out that Universe of Energy would finally close its doors as Ellen's Energy Adventure, but finally close the doors of the original stuff this coming August. It's August 13th, just a few days from now. We decided to make an abrupt change here to the schedule and insert Universe of Energy in here. So we're doing a tribute, to that attraction as it was, and obviously, hopefully, we may lose a lot of different things that were original elements to maybe the show building and the interior design and mechanics. So we're gonna go through all that tonight, tell you a little bit about what it was like before Ellen started paying rent. So let's take a trip back to the late 70s and early 80s and talk about the construction at the Universe of Energy. Going back to the early plans of Epcot, there was always the intention of having some sort of energy pavilion, and even going way, way further back, it was always going to be a solar energy pavilion. And they had envisioned this building to be a number of parabolic mirrors collecting the sun's rays into a center. And that really eventually fell apart. And that actually mirrors, no pun intended, or pun intended, I should say, a power plant actually out in California called Bright Source, which now is huge, and we're going to talk about Bright Source a little bit later. But it uses about 350,000 mirrors to focus all the light into these boiler towers and boil water and make steam and make electricity. And that features streamers. Do you know what streamers are, guys?
I don't think so.
Streamers are the birds that get caught in the sun's rays, and they stream down fully cooked. So maybe parabolic mirrors wasn't the right way to go in a theme park.
Yeah, there's a lot of birds in Florida, and especially in that area, being built on a giant nature preserve.
Exactly. Not really a good idea. So Exxon got involved, and obviously them being an oil company and other energy areas, things change, and they decided to change the solar energy and incorporate it by using photovoltaic cells, or as we know them, solar panels on the roof. So now, an interesting thing about the pavilion is that because of the solar panels, it always had to face a certain way, specifically to the south. They wanted to have them tilted at about 30 degrees from horizontal based on where you were in Florida. So if you look through a lot of the history and a lot of the old maps and concept artwork and concept models, the Universe of Energy building really did not change location at all. And there's a lot of writing on it saying that it's really due to to that having to be positioned for the maximum amount of solar energy. So it's kind of interesting. Have any of you guys ever seen it outside of that location? I mean, theoretically you could put it anywhere, or even in the bottom left corner, maybe where imagination is, but then the panels wouldn't be able to be seen by the guests.
I've not seen it when Epcot reached the modeling stage. I've never seen it in a different spot.
Yeah.
Because there were countless models of Epcot in its various incarnations and proposals, and I mean, every one of them, energy was there.
Right. So, unless anybody has any other information, we can't find anything that would suggest that it could have been somewhere else. So as we said, it has to be on a rise. So the building starts at 20 feet and rises to about 60 feet in the back. And it's a pretty large building. It's 430 by 270 feet with 105,000 square feet. So pretty large. Now, there's a lot of talk about, people say it's a triangle, it's a hexagon. There's a lot of discussion also too that it's really a square turned on 90 degrees and then cut the corners off. But which makes sense because there are a lot of squares in the mural, in the tiles, in the pre-shows. We're going to talk about squares and rectangles were very prominent in the design. So as you approach the pavilion, there's these reflecting pools with the Universe of Energy logo sitting right in the middle, and to enter the pavilion, you would go around either left or right of these reflecting pools that had all these mirrors. And maybe those mirrors, wasn't there some wives' tale about those mirrors reflecting, or was it Spaceship Earth that said they reflected and melted something? Wasn't there something like that?
I seem to recall us trying to talk about that with I think it was the Spaceship Earth myth.
Was the spaceship? Okay, all right. So it wasn't the mirrors at Universe.
No. They're pretty.
Yep. So as you go in, there's a wonderful mural as you enter the pavilion, and the automatic doors would open. And do you guys know what that mural was of? Because I didn't know this for many years until I finally really studied it. It just looked cool, but never realized it was something.
You're talking about the one with the time on it?
Yeah, where the weight clock is in the middle, yeah.
No, I don't.
So I assume it's some kind of photography of the sun and the sun's energy, but I don't know exactly if it's infrared or what the...
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you look on the left-hand side of it, you'll see this giant curve, right? And then the energy is coming out of that curve. That curve is just a small portion of the sun. Now, the really interesting thing about this mural is that if you go to the right of it, past the clock, where the thermal imaging camera, so to speak, or what it's seeing as the energy, when the energy starts to wane off, there's one of the blue tiles, and in it is a very small dot, about the size of maybe, the tip of your pinky finger. And that represents the size of the Earth in comparison to the curvature of the sun on the left-hand side of the mural. So, I mean, such a minute little detail that unless somebody told you, you would never pick up on it. But when you take a step back and you look at that mural, and you're like, wow, and you get it, you kind of see it, and it's supposed to really show how much energy there is in the sun. Again, this goes back to the original idea of it being a solar, a solar pavilion, really showcasing solar energy. So I've got a lot of different other technical things to talk about. I'm gonna drop those in as we go through. But Hal, I'm gonna turn over to you here for the pre-show.
Everybody talks about these redox screens. And I think it's interesting because Disney is typically usually very secretive about who worked on attractions. It's like up until very recently, you never heard the names of Imagineers, or certainly not any kind of independent contractor said like, oh, this is so-and-so's thing that who worked on it. So I always thought it was kind of unusual as I was growing up that this was promoted as a redox screens, and that a gentleman by the name of Emil Radock was given credit everywhere. So I kept wondering, like, who is this guy and how did he come to work at Epcot? So here's what I found out. So get ready to learn everything you ever wanted to know about Radock screens and were afraid to ask. So Emil Radock was born in 1918 in what is now the Czech Republic. His brother Alfred was a theater director, and he co-founded the National Theater in Prague in 1948 with this guy named Josef Svoboda. Now, what's interesting about these dudes is that they were pioneering the use of projection mapping back in 1948, like long before we called it projection mapping or anything else. Alfred Radock became known as for using very dramatic, very minimalistic set designs with image projections that were designed and engineered by this Svoboda gentleman. So they did that for quite a while. So in 1958, those two guys in Brussels created a show called Laterna Magica that combined multiple screens with live actors, musicians, and dancers. Emil joined his brother to co-direct the second version of that show in 1960, which toured Europe and Russia. So then this is when Emil Radock starts getting involved with these kinds of shows. And they got so well known by doing this, they were actually asked to create 4 presentations for the Czechoslovakian pavilion at Expo 67 in Montreal. So here we are, we've talked about it before. It's like we find all these things at Expo 67. I'm going to guess that somebody saw these presentations at Expo 67, and when they were doing Epcot, thought, "Oh, we need to get that guy on it." So at Expo 67, Emil Radock directed a show called "The Birth of the World" for the Czech Pavilion. There were actually 4 projection shows inside. There was another one where there were just like a bunch of film projected on like different shapes that were turning in things. But this one that he did, he had Josef Svoboda design a screen that they called the Diplorekagen, which was 112 cubes, 8 rows of 14 screens. And if you can think about sort of like cubes on tracks that would go forwards and backwards out of the wall. So instead of the ones at the universe of energy that spun, these ones would go forwards and backwards. And inside each one of these cubes was a slide projector. So you got this sort of moving mosaic effect, very similar to what we saw at the universe of energy, but done with just slide projectors, but still synchronized sort of by computers with to a soundtrack. And there's a little bit of a brief amount of film that I was able to find on this and some photos. So we'll put that in the show notes so you can see it, because it's really cool. It's a huge screen, gigantic, like probably about the size of what was in the pre-show at the Universe of Energy. And it looks really awesome. So those shows actually had a really huge impact. They were super popular. And the Czech Pavilion ended up being one of the big hits at the Expo. So it's not surprising then that when the opportunity for Epcot came around, that someone would find him. How he ended up, I think, being a little bit more accessible. In 1968, Czechoslovakia was invaded by the Warsaw Pact nations, and Emil exiled himself to Canada, so he continued to work there. So when it was time for Epcot to start getting designed in the 80s, it's like they probably just went to Canada and was able to find him there and get him to work on it. So what did he do? He created And here's where we're a little foggy, but my best guess is Emil probably did the film, designed it, directed it, and probably worked with Disney to actually have Disney do the engineering for the screens itself, since he was not necessarily like the technical guy who did that. But I think he probably came up with the concept, and Disney worked on the engineering part of it. The pre-show used a thing that he dubbed the kinetic mosaic screen. It was 100 sort of prisms. So instead of boxes, if you picture the idea of a prism turned upwards with a y-axis going through it, you could spin this prism sort of all around 360 degrees. And there were 5 faces. So there were 2, if you picture a triangle with like white on 2 faces and black on another face, you could sort of twist that. So that way you could show all white flat, or sort of like a prism with white on 2 sides, or flat black, or some sort of combination of like black on the left with white on the right, and white on the left and black on the right. So
which is really impressive, because when you have the white facing at this 45-degree angle, you need 2 projectors to hit that at the exact precise angle, but the effect is awesome.
Yeah,
just it's nothing that I've ever seen before or seen since then.
Yeah, and I think the concept of going from the individual slide projectors inside to film, so they had 5 35 millimeter film projectors shining on all this. So I think the idea is that would be less maintenance than a bunch of like slide projectors inside of the thing.
Yeah.
And certainly it opens up for the creative possibilities, because you can use some live action in there as well as, stills. And he did. There's definitely a combination of like, there are some parts of the show that are sequenced very much as if it was a slide projector show. And then there's other parts that use film in it. But it's a really fascinating technique. And it's one of those things you really had to see it in real life. Yes, Brian.
I do think it's worth mentioning for the people who never saw the attraction that each of the theaters and show scenes we're going to talk about are identical in dimensions and layout as to the Ellen attraction today. So if you've ridden it, we're talking about theaters that you've actually been in, and they just had different stuff on the walls or whatever.
Yeah, that's very true.
So what I find interesting about that whole setup is just the amount of effort that had to go into making that film, masking off what you wanted to project, making sure that the angle of each projector is correct, the timing of turning. I mean, I can only imagine the amount of time that they spend in the editing booth. Again, this is film, folks. This isn't, magic of digital editing or anything like that. Sitting there and timing it and just getting it all adjusted perfectly. And the masking is what amazes me the most. I mean, just on those 35 millimeters, how much every single frame, through some fashion or another, had to be masked so that it just displays and projects just on that screen at the right time.
Yeah, so to extend on what Todd's talking about, there are times in the show where part of the screen would flip to black. So maybe you'd see like a diagonal line, and the film that corresponds with that would actually be sort of cut in such a way that it. Now, I think the black was set up so it was a non-reflective material, so maybe it absorbed some of the light. So maybe it didn't have to be super perfect, but they did work really hard to make sure that the blocks that were black were actually also blocked out in the film.
Right.
So it all matched very seamlessly.
Well, not only that, and then you had spacing between all of them. So if your camera if your projector rather is just a couple inches too far forward or too far back or too far to the right, the whole effect is gone. You're gonna lose it. So
it throws it all off. Yeah.
The precision was,
and if
was
you
impressive.
Right, if you watch the videos of it now that are online of people who just had cameras up in the theater as they ran, and you take today's mindset out of it, just like you're talking about. I mean, today it would be easy to do with digital, literally each cube displaying its own information. But back then, knowing that all of this is being done seamlessly, and you watch it all move, and it really is mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. It's more mind-blowing than actually what you're watching on the screen.
Right. The technology behind it. Yeah. Now they, like you said, Brad, they just throw up 3 LCD screens and rotate them, and they'll be perfect.
Right. And the way it was used was really incredibly smart, because there'll be things like where there's a transition, say where things are going from the center of the screen out to the right, and they'll flip the screens in concert with that transition so that the screen is actually sort of undulating as that transition is happening. It was the coolest thing to see in real life. And again, this thing was massive. This was like, a 90-foot wide screen that was 14 feet tall. So when you're watching these things sort of move around and play, it was really impressive when it was done. And the sad part was, though, as a kid, it's like I read about this screen in my Epcot preview book, and then we finally went to Epcot like 6 or 8 months after it opened, and the screen didn't move. And then we went back the next year, and the screen didn't move. And it actually took...
Yeah, one of the uniform things we found from cast members, reminiscing, is the massive amount of maintenance and care that system took and frequently broke pieces of it.
Our best information is that it took almost 2 years for them to get the actual screen working. And if you think about, I was trying to put myself in the head of like, well, what was so difficult about this? So it is 100 independent motors or more running this thing, because each thing had its own motor. I think the computer
synchronized.
Yeah, synchronized. The control part of it was, I don't think, difficult. But not only do these things have to spin, if you think a little bit about physics, you also have to stop them at a precise time. So you have to be able to start the motion and then stop the motion as well. So you need to like sort of put the brakes on it in a way that makes sense so it stops too. And I'm sure that as the motors would burn out, I mean, just trying to find a motor that can I know Disney works very hard. It's like as an engineer through engineering to go to try to find motors that are in specifications that work. But I mean, you're asking those motors to do an awful lot of work.
Yeah.
So I think when I was doing the research, and I kind of remember as years went on, it's like you'd walk in and there'd be like 3 random ones stuck, sort of like dead pixels on a laptop screen today. Before they could get it to work again.
The official name too was it was a kinetic mosaic, is what they call it. And there were no seats in there. And now one interesting aspect of it is that when the lines were big, it wasn't a problem, because as they get ready to queue people up, they just let everybody in, and then the pre-show would start. But I remember later on, as it became the lines started to dwindle down, what would happen is the pre-show would start, and the theater would maybe be a third filled, a quarter filled. So some people would walk in halfway through and never see the entire projection from presentation from start to finish, and they missed it because they were just trying to load as many people. You go, like I said, you go back, and when the line stretched, practically past horizons years ago, it was a different experience, and you got the full experience there. But it really did change.
Yeah.
Well, because they wouldn't start it till the theater filled up, and then they'd load you all in, and I mean, it's that way. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of a couple of other attractions they do that with now, where it's kind of like it's an open door until they actually load the ride vehicles. You just wander in.
What's the content of the kinetic mosaic? What are we seeing?
Yes, let's talk about the film. So the film is called The Universe of Energy, which is probably not shocking considering the attraction is called Universe of Energy. So it starts out with one of my very favorite, most bizarre things ever in Epcot history, where this tiger on a black background, almost like a Spencer's Gifts blacklight poster, starts running towards the camera. And just when it's about to end, as it's running, when its feet touch the ground, there's these animated like puddle, like I don't know what you call it, like waves when you like step in a puddle and the things come out. It's so bizarre. So this tiger's running, these little waves are coming out. That's all hand animated, and right when the tiger is about to leap, these 2 giant X's appear on the screen that morph into the Exxon logo. And then like there's this blue line that shoots across the background to sort of like reveal the width of all the screens. And then there's like this sort of like a wireframe globe that comes in, and then it starts exploding like fireworks, and it keeps exploding like fireworks. And then this giant Universe of Energy like title comes up.
Ripples is the word.
Ripples
is the word you were looking for the tiger puddles.
Yes.
It's like they show their party piece right off the beginning, like the size of the screen and Exxon.
Yeah.
I know. I got to go back to the Tiger reference, though. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember, but years ago when it was Esso and Exxon, it was put a tiger in your tank, and that was it. And then actually,
the tiger was their mascot,
right? And do you remember you could buy stuffed tiger tails that you would hang on your gas cap and
from your gas tank?
Yeah, and hang off back then it was underneath your license plate, right, or on the side of your car. Now, and that it would be meant that you filled up at Esso or Exxon. And it was a great part of advertising. So it was neat that they continued the tiger theme right into the opening.
That's also in Seinfeld. Remember when George has the claim you're free, save the tiger Exxon poster in his wallet?
Show this card at any participating Orlando area Exxon station to get your free Save the Tiger poster.
Just give me that.
So they actually had like the tiger that like saved the tiger thing at the exit. It's like they would give you a pamphlet at one point for
really?
like their donation thing, to like save the tigers, which I had no idea. Cool. I don't remember that, so I don't know what that was all about, but that's funny. I think they used that advertising campaign well into the 80s.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I remember it. And it was,
They bought the tiger tails back in the late 80s too. I remember buying one of them.
So, all right. So now we've got all that going on. So our good friend Vic Perrin comes on to explain what energy is.
The universe we know is one of dynamic forces, its heartbeat sending a constant flow of energy coursing through the vastness.
I think the idea here is that like a crowd of people are coming in and they have absolutely no idea what's going on, so it's a good chance to just sort of educate everyone. So we talk about actually what the definition of energy is, and then we go into the various forms of energy: nuclear, chemical, electrical, mechanical, heat, and light. And as they're talking about this, the screen, in a very artistic way, with electrical energy, they show like storms with lightning, and the screens are all moving this time. Mechanical, they show things like rocks falling down a rock slide. I mean, it's very...
They have the windmills in Holland as well.
Yeah. And which is actually, that's one of the really cool ones, the windmills, because they basically have like one piece of film of a windmill, and then they blow it up at different sizes in different positions in that mosaic. So they really use the mosaic in that particular one well.
The unbridled winds were captured.
And then light, and then so they show the sun, and there's some neat things with that. And then they discuss how man's been able to harness the energies. Like for the one for fire is really cool because it starts out in the center screen. You see like a fireplace in this house, and the two side screens are filled with these like close up pictures of like the ends of wood. It's really cool, very dense, and then those things change to be like the inside of a house at some point with windows, and there's this really neat transition. And that's one of the cool things about Radoc's direction is like there's a lot of images that transition into other images. When they get to the song at the end, there's one thing of a flower that like fades into ballerinas in a circle to sort of be the same as the flower shape, and they put their hands in the center. It's sort of Busby Berkeley, but like it's very cool the way that's done.
So you mentioned something, how where they went through all the forms of energy and stuff. Take note of that, folks, because this becomes a very repetitive pattern as we go through the additional features.
That's true, yeah.
It is beat into you by the end of this pavilion. You know all forms of energy and how they're used. And I think, we'll talk about later, maybe the demise and why it changed and stuff. But it was a lot of the same thing over and over. But you had a segue into the song, right? We end with a song to get us into the main theater.
But I will say, this pavilion gets a bad rap a lot of times. It's like people who I think did not grow up with this, who have just read books and maybe seen some videos, have this notion that it's all about fossil fuels, and it's not. It's very balanced.
No, it was very really progressive too. It was very progressive for its time.
Yeah. I mean, other than the fact that you're going to look at dinosaurs and they needed to have a transition into that, it's like everything is given very equal weight.
Yeah. And watching it and listening, I mean, you hear them say things that, biomass and renewables, things that are now commonplace in our terminology, but back then 35 years ago was just not something you heard. And they made some great predictions too, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But didn't come quite true.
So now we'll go back to your song. So you've seen all this stuff. It's like you're probably starting to get a little bit depressed because
what was it? Kind of 9 minutes, right? 9 minutes you're in there.
Yeah. They leave you with this message that there's all of this is going to come to an end because all this stuff, a lot of these energies are finite.
Peak energy.
So we have to figure out some way to be able to understand them in order to continue to thrive and grow as a civilization. And then Bob Moline's song "Energy, You Make the World Come Round," go round comes in to sort of make us feel better, which I think does work. So you have this very sort of positive, uplifting feeling by the time you're done. And then the doors open up and then we move into Theater 1 to find out what's going on. Now, the part that I find really fascinating about all this, it's like, so this is a 9-minute show done by one of the preeminent, designers of multimedia presentations. At any other place, any park, any other expo, that would have been the end of it. That would have been your show because
Right. You're done. We're out of here.
It was really good. But nope. Yeah, Disney, it's like, that's just the warm up. The thing that probably would have won an award at any other expo, is just the opening thing for you to go into a much larger pavilion.
Listen and you'll hear the heartbeat of a universe teeming with force.
So, as Hal said, the doors open, the automatic doors open straight ahead of you, as they do today, and you walk into what is traditionally known as Theater 1. Now, if you go way back into the original design, it was going to be a regular Omnimover ride, and as the presentations and the pavilion itself got more and more complex, they decided to go to a moving theater type situation. Now, what's interesting, guys, is that American Journey Pavilion in 1964 at the World's Fair had a stadium-style theater that moved, and it actually had a driver. And it was, if you can imagine, a stadium setup theater just moving through these different things, and they kind of got their idea from that, and they turned to a company called Eggman Automation, who had designed this way to for warehouse transport, to carry very, very heavy loads through a warehouse. And that's what Imagineers decided to use as the base platform for the traveling theater cars.
You make the world go round. You make the world go round.
You know what's so funny about that? So here we are another 40 years later.
Yeah.
35 years later. And so over at Universal Studios, the King Kong attraction, it's like they're looking for a ride vehicle for that. And they find this thing for moving around, an automated driverless system that moves around like those shipping containers.
Oh, yeah. The big 53-footers. Yeah.
And they've gone and retrofitted that.
Perfect.
With the truck thing in order to make that ride. So here we are. It's like no idea is ever dies or ever never gets repeated again. It's like someone went out and found another cargo moving thing to make another ride vehicle out of that.
Well, but it's also an example of the, back in the 50s and 60s when they were building these ride systems for the theme parks and for the World's Fair, they had to invent them themselves. It wasn't a matter of adapting things that already existed, and by the time you get to the design phase of Epcot and a lot of attractions designed from here on out, it's adapting things that have been developed for industrial uses or other uses and putting them in a theme park setting, which obviously is more efficient and makes more sense from an engineering standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. So the entire attraction had a total of 13 of these vehicles. And when you walked into the main theater one, there were 6 of them set up, and what we'll talk about as a 6-pack, and we'll also talk a little bit about a 5-pack later on. Do you guys know where the 13th vehicle lived? Because they always traveled in packs of 6. There were 2 packs of 6 at any given time. Do you know where the 13th vehicle lived?
It'd like to winter in Boca Raton.
I assume there's got to be a backstage area.
It was
the garage.
Yeah. It was called the Bat Cave, actually, and there was a piece of rock in the dinosaur scene that would actually lift up, and behind that was a mechanical door, and they could drive it back to there. So we'll talk a little bit that. But I'm going to turn it over to Hal here, and we'll get into a little bit about the vehicles when we move into before we move into the dino scene. But an interesting thing too is so you go in there, you sit down in one of the 6 theater cars, and you sit down, you look up, and the entire theater is surrounded with curtains that I can only think that like Bonnie Appetit's going to come out, or it's a go-go show. I mean, they are silvery. I mean,
yeah, they're very shiny,
very showy. It's almost like a Broadway production. These aren't red.
It was like silver. It was like silver lame, wasn't it?
Yeah, silver or purple. I've seen some different.
I think it was silver. Yeah, maybe
the
with
coloring.
purple lights or something.
I'll tell you, going back to when I first rode in '83, I had probably looked at the preview books and I knew that there were, this concept of the moving theater cars, but it was still brand new. So when the doors first opened, the first time I went into the pavilion, and the rad extreme thing was cool. I'm like, oh, that's it. So you walk into this room, and then you see these like 6 things of seats set up.
Yeah, they look like church pews
with the ramps, so they could load the handicapped, like the wheelchairs and stuff on it, which was really innovative at the time and fantastic because my grandmother was in a wheelchair, and we were able to take her on almost everything at Epcot when it opened. But when you walked in, you just thought, oh, it just, like you said, Brian, it kind of looks like church pews. It's like it completely was lost to me that those were actually moving, right? And I don't think most people knew. So you went in and sat down, and I think you just expected a movie to start.
So and then you start spinning around.
Yeah, right. that was the weirdest thing when it suddenly starts turning. You're just like, what is going on?
What's going on? So tell us, how did we get to the turning spot? And then
all right,
I've got something else to add in.
So everyone comes in, you get seated, and the CM would actually in his spiel would tell you that the things were about to rotate to try to give you, like, set you up for what was going to happen. And I don't know if that was always there or if people just freaked out the first couple of times.
Well, but it reminds me of this story when the first department store installed escalators, and they had a guy with a snifter of brandy that you could take before you got on the escalator because the Victorian age people just couldn't take it.
Oh,
that's funny.
Well, it's also interesting too is that now when you walk in, there are these metal plates on the ground, and people mistake them for tracks, and it blows away the original idea. When the pavilion was designed, there was very little idea. You had no notion that things were going to move because those metal plates weren't there originally. People now think that they're tracks, but what's interesting that happened is that the cars began to pick up too much static electricity on the tires going over the carpet.
Yeah, the wheels on the carpet. Yeah.
So what they had to do is the people think, oh, those are tracks now. We're just going to move. It kind of blew away that after they had to move they had to add those metal plates to reduce the static electricity build up on the tire. So
that's interesting.
I think some of that might be lost because you walk in now and you see that, like, it's a track, man. Yeah, we're going for a ride. So, but back in 1983, it may not have been there.
Yeah, it was seamless at that point. So you go sit down, and then all of a sudden, like, everything starts to rotate on this giant turntable. And my understanding, Todd, is that there's actually it's like a giant air hockey puck. There's air pushes it up. It doesn't weigh like tons and tons.
It weighs extremely fit. So we're in Theater 1. It's 92 feet in diameter. It has 60 airbags underneath it. Now, here's the brilliant part of this, is that what happens is that they start pumping these airbags up with air, but they don't pump them up so that like a balloon where it just stops. They're constantly pumping air in, and there's small holes on the bottom of the airbag. And what happens is that all those 60-some airbags on there creates an air cushion just a couple millimeters thick, so to speak. But so much with the airbag that the entire turntable actually rises up above the theater floor 1 inch. And then from there, just a small little motor effortlessly can turn the entire 92 feet of 600 people sitting there. Each vehicle had about 97 folks sitting in it.
That is insane.
It's incredible because it functioned for so long.
Right.
It just worked.
And think about the infrastructure for this. And you're down 6-8 feet or something. And then when the computer would sense that the turntable turned to the right location, the motor would stop, and very slowly they would release out the air, and you would settle back down. And they said it was, if you were standing on the outside, you actually could see the turntable go up and down just that inch, but sitting in the theater cars, it was completely imperceptible to the.
I never perceived that it was going up ever. That's crazy.
So I forget what the weight was, but hey, it's 600 people in 6 theater cars. You know, I mean, it's
25,000 pounds per each car. So
And
is that
so-
one of the 6 or all, like the whole 6-pack?
So, but it also now, having sat in that theater countless times, and the first curtain opens and you're watching the movie, and then the rotation happens, and right as the rotation happens, you hear the which we always assumed was the motor, and really is probably the airbags.
Yeah. So there must be giant compressors somewhere, right?
Yeah, well,
there has to be a giant compressor tank someplace around.
So
there.
we're going to get into some of the soundproofing in a second. So tell them a little bit about the film before we move into Brian's, and we'll talk about that.
So your car is starting to rotate to the right, and then as you're starting to come around, the curtains in one section start to open up, and there are sort of these giant circles on the screen. And once again, in the way that like Disney does this so expertly well to guide your eye to where it wants to go, as your car is rotating, these curtains are lifting, and the screen is kind of revealing itself at the same exact rate that the car is moving. So it's this very seamless transition to the screen sort of revealing itself and the projection widening as you come around. It's really, really well done.
Sunlight, the original source of energy in all fossil fuels. Its radiance, falling upon the seas of Earth, gives rise to the first stirrings of life.
So that film is called The Energy Creation Story, and it was directed by a longtime Disney special effects artist named Jack Boyd. He actually started in effects animation in the 1940s with the Shorts unit. His last effects animation job was on The Great Mouse Detective in 1986. And the reason they used him is because this 3 to 4 minute film is really a tour de force demonstration of Disney's every technique that Disney's special effects animation has done, like during the entire history of the studio. The purpose of this section is to show you how actually fossil fuels in particular were created. So what you have are 3 70mm projectors showing on 3 screens. This whole thing is 115 feet wide and 22 feet tall. So I believe the dimensions of the Ellen show are about the same.
You're in competition with Birnbaum here. He says 32 by 155.
Oh, okay. See, there's a lot of back and forth here. I've seen a couple of different statistics, so I'm not sure who is right. But there's a number of different Disney publications that have this size. So
one other note on the film too is when it was animated, they actually used the multiplane camera for it. So probably one of getting towards one of the last uses of that.
They actually had to pull it out of mothballs and sort of cleaned it up and probably rebuild it a little bit for this. It's actually the largest piece of multiplane animation ever done for a motion picture because of the width. And I'm not sure. My assumption is because this was shown on 3 screens, they probably had to take whatever that. It was the backgrounds would have been painted as like a complete single unit, and the animation would have been done as but they probably had to shoot it 3 times, like once for the left, once for the center, and once for the right, and then try to synchronize like the playback of all 3 of these so it appeared as one continuous image across all across all three screens, because there are many times in this film when the whole background is doing a pan, say from the left to the right, and all three screens are in perfect synchronization as it's doing that. So it was a huge undertaking. But what you get to see through this is things like how organic matter is transformed into fossil fuels. So they talk about how plant materials and plankton and things died, and then created sort of like this snowfall of organic matter that then went under the Earth's crust and was put under intense pressure. And this is all, it's basically if you've ever watched a lot of the older Disney movies, it's like you saw a lot of the tricks, especially things like some of the package films where they would Make My Music and Saludos Amigos, where they'd have sort of like these very effect laden sections. It's like you saw a lot of these same tricks used in this. It's really incredible. It was probably, and another thing is the quality of the backgrounds and the animation, all hand done, all hand inked. I don't know if we use xerography. I believe it was actually all done with like hand traced cells, because of it was going to get projected so big. They wanted to do the best quality possible, so they actually went back to a lot of older techniques that they hadn't used in years in order to pull this off.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and there's actually a really interesting thing at the beginning. The very first thing you see is some effects animation of like waves, and that was not cleaned up and painted. It was left as like rough pencil animation. So I don't know if that was a function of them running out of time or budget in order to do that. But it's really cool because you get to see, real pencil and graphite and like, someone's initial raw drawing. So it's really powerful. But it's a very cool film.
So that runs about four and a half minutes, I think.
Yeah, about 4.5 minutes. And one of the things, this is another one of those things that people, I think, kind of forget or maybe get wrong. And Brian, I'm sure you'll talk about this when we get into the dinosaur section. The link between dinosaurs and fossil fuels is tenuous to like non-existent.
Well, that's true now, but at the time it was a popular theory.
Yeah.
Over the last 30 years, it's become less so, just on logistics. And I'll address it now. The original theory was that basically dinosaur bones, dinosaur soup in the soil eventually is what made up fossil fuels. And what they've determined now is that there's simply so much oil and coal and other things in the ground that there simply weren't enough dinosaurs that existed in the history of the Earth to have produced it. So they've now gone to the broader that while that may be a piece of it, it's more likely it's plant life and other things that have decayed and over the years and turned into those
organic fuels.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, Brian. In the 1982 version, that's exactly what they said. They
were ahead of it.
Everyone thinks that they thought the dinosaur thing in the universe of imagery was a direct link, but it really was. They really did mention the organic matter, and not so much. It's funny. It's like they spent a lot of time actually like working on the plants and stuff. Like they had the latest scientific findings on what plants existed then.
They went to great lengths. I know we're jumping into the next scene, but it's a good setup because it's a good setup because they went to great lengths to this scene you're going to roll into.
Yeah,
that the film that you watch actually introduces you. Now let us take you back to the age of prehistoric when all of this was going on and
all right, so how, as you said, 4.5 minutes that finishes up. Now let's just think about it. 4.5 minutes, they got to get you out of there. As we mentioned, the pre-show was 9 minutes. It took about 5 minutes to get you in there, give or take a couple seconds here and there. They got to get you moving. So as the theater rotates again, the curtains on the right hand side of the theater as you go in start to rise up, and as that happens, behind those curtains is a giant wall, and these are movable walls. There's a number of them in the attraction. I think there's 3 or 4 total. Some of them are as tall as 12 feet, widths up to 92 feet long, and approximately 12 inches thick. These are massive, and some of them actually go down into the foundation. They're hydraulically brought down. They have to be silent. And the reason for them being so thick is that each scene, as how talked about, there's this, you're watching an animated film about the dinosaurs. There were booms and there were, loud noises. And when we talk about the finale and we talk about the theater 2, and even the dinosaurs we're getting into, each of them have their own unique sounds, sights, lights, and even smells, and they didn't want one to interfere with the other. So this giant door opens, and at that point, the six pack, as we know it, which is the six theater cars, begin to this ballet where the right front one starts to take off, followed by they all six progress forward first, and then they start to do this ballet where they start to create a single file. And as you enter, you begin to smell some things. There's a big layer of fog on the ground, which we'll talk about was unfortunately later removed. And Brian, this is where you're going to take us into the age of the dinosaurs.
Come with us now and experience a few moments from that dark and mysterious past.
Yes, the film that you were watching in Theater 1 closes with much of the Earth's present supply was deposited during the primeval era when great reptiles roamed the land. Come with us now and experience a few moments from that dark and mysterious past. Now, and as Todd said, all that kind of lays out, and just as similar to today, when the dinosaur reveal is really one of the coolest things that we will ever see in a theater attraction. And going in when I did the first time in 1988, knowing that this was the dinosaur ride, and I mean, I was so excited to see dinosaurs and what they might have looked like and actually operating. So when that curtain lifts and you see this. They actually do it from night into day. When the curtain opens, it is nighttime, and as the cars move in, the sun is actually rising, and you get to see the light actually changed at the time as the cars moved in, and you'd go into these two show scenes, massive show scenes with dinosaurs. Before we move in, we should mention why dinosaurs are there. One, and the primary reason in this attraction is, A, they knew how to do dinosaurs, and B, it was a way to make the energy attraction interesting. Because if it was just this other stuff, it probably would not have been a very interesting attraction.
Yeah.
So but Disney did dinosaurs for the first time when they did Fantasia. They had a dinosaur scene in there, in the Rite of Spring section. And, without getting into the whole history of that, one of the things they took great care at that time to make the dinosaurs look like beasts and not cute little dinosaurs. Walt wanted them to be somewhat accurate as best as they could. And, it's also worth noting that, we didn't have thousands of years of human study of dinosaurs. I think the first complete dinosaur fossil was sometime in the mid-1800s. So, over the years there were bones and skulls and things found, but nobody really knew the size and scope of dinosaurs until the mid-1800s, and their knowledge of them has developed since then. So, Walt put them in Fantasia. They then put that one section from Rite of Spring from Fantasia out as an educational film in the 50s and 60s, on 16 millimeter film that would go around to schools, where they took all the fanciful classical music out and actually put a narration over it. And I don't know if that's circulating on YouTube or not. I haven't looked to see if that particular one, but it was actually out there and circulating in schools, and it was released by Disney Educational Media, and it was called A World is Born. So they reused that again. So then dinosaurs came around next when we get to the 1964 World's Fair. Disney put them in the Ford's Magic Skyway attraction. And for the short version of that, because we could spend episodes upon episodes talking about the World's Fair attractions. Basically figured the Wedway people mover, except instead of getting into a Wedway car, you were getting into an actual full-size Ford car that was driverless, and it would take you through scenes through the history of man, essentially. It was a time vehicle, if you will. We might be familiar with that concept. Walt had a bunch of his best guys working on that, Claude Coates and Mark Davis and Blaine Gibson, the sculptor who did all the dinosaur faces and the general look. And they put a lot of work into trying to make those dinosaurs for the 64 World's Fair look realistic as people would expect dinosaurs to look based on the research of the day. At that time, after the 64 World's Fair was over, they took some of those dinosaurs. First, Walt tried to talk Ford into sponsoring a whole attraction at Disneyland. They said no. So Disney took the dinosaurs, some of them, and brought them out to Disneyland and put them in on the Disneyland Railroad. So they needed to figure out where to put these in Disneyland, and what they came up with was, we'll put them on the Disneyland Railroad. When you go through one of the enclosed scenes, it was of the Grand Canyon. So they said, well, we'll just make it the Grand Canyon in the prehistoric times, what it might have looked like. So this was a way for them to use the dinosaurs there. And they are still on display now on the railroad, correct?
Yes. Yes, they are. In fact, they even duplicated that for Euro Disneyland.
Concept for the pavilion, obviously energy. They want to make it interesting and use something that, as they did with a lot of stuff in Epcot, they used expertise they already had. They knew how to make these dinosaurs. They knew how to make these indoor scenes, and it was a good way to bridge the two pieces of teaching people about energy.
Yeah, I think they literally probably still had all the molds from the 64 World's Fair, so it was just a matter of popping out another one. And I will say they had actually tried a concept for the Magic Kingdom to use the dinosaurs. There's some artwork running around and some rumors that I don't know if Mark Davis ended up being attached to it or not, but they were planning on. Oh, actually, it's in one of the planning documents that is on TED on TV's site, the Disney Docs. There's a list of upcoming attractions, and for 1976 at the Magic Kingdom, it talks about the Lost World, which was supposed to be a dinosaur boat ride that would have been in the waterway by Tomorrowland. So they would have used these dinosaurs in the Magic Kingdom. They did not get their chance to do that, probably due to the oil crisis and everything going asunder. So when the opportunity came to use them at Epcot, they absolutely did.
Yes. So the scene that you're moving into, there's a lot of build-up for this, but come on, it's dinosaurs. It is a 7-minute journey through two show scenes filled with dinosaurs, where you're in the prehistoric era. And you're in a primeval forest. The diorama itself actually is 32 feet high and 515 feet across. And it took them nearly 6,000 hours to paint it.
It's insanely massive. It's crazy.
I don't always know that you capture the scope of it when you're on the ride.
I don't think you realize that it's one contiguous piece. It's just
right. And when you step out,
I feel like. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I want to hear from you, JT.
I feel like every room in general blows my mind going in. And this one's like the kicker. Like, I mean, if your attention is drawn to like that pinky looking, dinosaur background with their silhouettes. But I mean, even if you look up, you're like, oh my gosh, the ceiling is it's huge. Everything is just massive. It's just crazy to me.
And that you've had the experience mostly on the Ellen version. If you rode the original version with all of the effects when they were working, and I certainly saw it when they were all working. I mean, you walked in or rode in, and fog fills this room that was warm. I mean, they had the temperature in there to approximate a swampy forest. You'd get these swampy smells from the smellitizers that were a lot stronger back then than you get today.
I heard that they were completely turned off too. That's just remnants of what you're smelling.
Well, today, yeah. And then you move in first and they start you small. You can see the brontosaurus bathing pool in the distance, but as you move in, the first things you see are oversized bugs and giant millipede, and the biggest dinosaurs are these brontosaurus off in the distance, and who obviously as you move closer to them get closer. And then there's some duck-billed trachodons that are bathing in a pool of water.
One of the things about that opening, do you guys remember how it would start to rain by the brontosaurus pool at first?
Storm.
Yeah, there's lightning in the background and rain would come down. And I think part of the thing was that whole thing of when the theater cars move up, it's that's pretty fast, but when they start to peel off and go off individually, it seems like that process takes forever. So
I think that to me, when you first pull in there, I feel like you're getting there. I don't know if it's intentional, but I get this image of everything's still and it looks like you're looking at another screen or a picture or something, and then movement starts. It's that build up that Disney does.
Well, and some of the dinosaurs were also programmed to ignore the cars, and some of them were designed to actually kind of inspect the cars as they went by. There was a lot of interactivity that went into that to really give that effect.
So and always talking about the show scene itself, and Disney didn't just put what we would think a jungle would look like. They did an absurd amount of research into plants and trees that would have existed then that don't exist anymore. And that's what's recreated in there as best they could based on research and fossils. And I mean, the level of detail, we wouldn't know the difference, but I appreciate the difference.
Yeah.
So something else
all those things, all those plants, those are the things that became the fossil fuel. It's the dinosaurs are really just a sideshow. It's really the plants and trees that should be the main emphasis of those rooms.
That's right.
Well, right. And there's 250 of those prehistoric trees, and they go up to 40 feet in the air, and that's in that show scene.
It's insane.
I mean, there's a great scene. And Todd was talking about the brontosaurus bathing pool, and the thing most people remember about it is as you get closest to it, there's the one brontosaurus up there eating the fern or whatever is out of his mouth. It's still there today. Back then, though, one of the brontosaurus actually moved through the pool, it was walking with you as you went. I mean, it doesn't move today; they're stationary. But back then, one of the brontosaurus animatronics actually moved through the bathing pool, to give you the. I mean, just imagine these were the largest animatronics that Disney ever did.
Yeah.
And the dirty little secret is by the end of the 80s, a lot of the animatronics in Great Movie Ride, which was the next big animatronic thing they did, were made by a third party company, and all of the animatronics now are. But back in the late 70s, early 80s, Disney was still doing all of its own animatronics in its own shop. So they built these things in a shop on site and then transferred them into the building, where they did some finishing work on them once they were inside, and we're obviously still building the attraction. But there's a big hatch in the back of the building where we've got a couple pictures of them moving them in. But one of the stories that we talked about on Twitter a couple of Sundays ago, 4 or 5 weeks ago, when the closure was announced, when they did this, they obviously needed to get the dinosaurs from the shop where they were built into the attraction. That required them to use the existing roadways on Disney property, except that the brontosaurus, once it was on the back of the truck, was too tall to pass under the monorail beams that ran into Epcot. So they actually removed the monorail beam, the one monorail beam. And so there's this picture of the monorail beam hoisted up on a crane on its side, and the brontosaurus on the back of a flatbed truck being moved through the roads into the Epcot project. And that actual picture was shared by an Imagineer named Dan Adams, who did a lot of he was trained by Leota Toombs and did a lot of the painting of the animatronics. And so he shared some great stories over the years, especially about the dinosaurs, because he worked on a bunch of them. But so they moved these dinosaurs in there. There's a total of 36 dinosaurs in the 2 show scenes that you move through. And they were, as I said, they were the largest that were ever built.
Now, I have a memory, and I want to see if I'm just making this up or if this is real. Does anyone remember? I know in the current version, people make a big deal because like one of the brontosauruses sneezes and it kind of gets, I guess, some.
It throws mist at you. Yeah.
It's like a crude mist right now. Like when you roll by, because I just did it in January. Like it's just kind of noisy. It's like a, it's not very realistic. Okay. Let's say.
I recall that the dinosaur that was chewing the grass or the tree or whatever that was over the cars back then would actually drip water on people like underneath it. And I think I got hit by water at least once or twice. And I
remember that as well.
I wonder if that was a condensation buildup that just dripped off of
hydraulic fuel leak.
Yeah, or hydraulic. I guess it would just. I thought it would just breathe out of its nose or something like that.
It's dino DNA.
Because they do hang over pretty far, so I can see that if you were on that right side of your car, how you would have got it.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of discussion about the different effects, and I've never seen anyone mention that, so I didn't know if I was insane or just people, again, the benefit of having been there versus people trying to write about something that they didn't experience firsthand.
One of the other changes I think I've certainly noticed in watching the films and remembering going through it originally versus in the current version, it was I feel like it was scarier in the original. The sounds were louder and a little more menacing. The dinosaur growls and sounds, and now that first bathing pool and that whole first scene tends to be more serene, and then you move into what's a little bit, I mean, I don't want to call it scary, but there's conflict between the dinosaurs, and then for a period of time there was that Ellen animatronic that was in there, but we won't talk about that.
No. So that's where the volcano is too, right? The original had the volcano.
Yeah. So I want to touch on the scenes that you do see with the dinosaurs, just so we can cover them all.
Yeah.
I talked about the bugs on the side, the millipede and the Edaphosaurus that are on the side when you go in, and then there's
the big iguana-looking thing on the tree, right?
And then there's the Brontosaurus, and don't miss the giant snails. There's a giant snail on the one side when you go in, and there's a giant snail towards the exit on the other side when you go out. There's duck-billed trachodons they're bathing in the pool of water. And then there's a number of ornithomimus, I think it is. And they are the ones that are watching as one of their brethren sinks into the boiling tar pit. I don't know if that's still in this show now. I'd have to watch a video. Is that still in there?
I think it's been more covered up by plants now, because I seem to recall that tar pit, you could actually kind of see like the tar bubbling up and it was brown. And I think that's another one of those effects that have been kind of lost over time.
So then you get to the point where you start looking overhead, and there's the pterodons that are up there with their wings and looking down on you like they might swoop down at any moment and steal one of the children from your ride vehicle. And then there's the fight of the two dinosaurs overhead on your right between
I think you skipped one section that was
what did
particularly impressive. That very long snake-like.
I was going to mention that's the scene where they eventually inserted Ellen.
Yes.
Yeah, she's poking it.
But yeah, so she's standing there with a pitchfork or whatever it is, trying to fight it off. But yeah, there was that it was next to the bubbling lava.
Right, it was like kind of in between there and the pteranodons, right?
Yeah, so there was this on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
As you're going through, and there was this first the lava pit and the flow of the lava coming. It was really bright red. It bubbled. You felt heat. And then the next scene was this. Yeah, it was like this giant snake with teeth, and it's still there, but it looks a little more cartoony now in its current incarnation.
The one thing I do want to say about that snake scene, though, there is one effect there that was fantastic that they've turned off that nobody remembers now. There was a huge wave of water that would come crashing in, just like outside of the Living Seas Pavilion.
Yeah.
Because that thing was supposed to be a tidal pool, and this huge wave would come crashing in and push water around. And that thing coming out, it was really cool.
It was nice. It was a little scary, but
yeah. Yeah, I want to talk about the lava because
Yeah.
I remember seeing that in the all the books, and then I never really saw it when I was on the ride.
That was
for some reason.
exactly so.
Seems like such a letdown, this whole attraction for you.
Well-
how everything was not what you expected.
No, but I'm with him on this. So here's a memory of mine. I remember when Epcot opened and there was newspaper articles and television. I remember distinctly talking to one of our neighbors, and she was an adult. I was 8 at the time, and I remember talking to me and saying, "Did you see Epcot on TV?" I said, "Yeah, it looks great. I can't wait to go." She, "Did you read this and that?" And I remember talking about the lava at Universe of Energy, and she had read in an article that they had this gets me. They had reused a pump from a dog food factory in order to pump the lava because of the viscosity. And and reading this article is just amazing because, like, look at this technology, we're doing these things, and I could not wait to go see the lava, and I missed it. I never seem to ever see it. See, how's going to say the same thing?
Yeah, same exact thing. There's a picture.
You missed it like it was going, and you just didn't catch it, or
Well,
was
it's
it
like you never
broken,
knew
or-
where to look. But if you look at the footage that Martin has on his complete tribute, it seems to be stock video footage that Disney may have filmed ahead of the attraction opening, and the lava is exploding and spewing, and it looks thick and gelatinous and like real lava, right?
There's
Yeah,
there's
like
a
a
picture.
science experiment.
Yeah, there's a picture in the Walt Disney's Epcot Center book of this technician with sticking his hand into the lava. And I remember reading, there was a thing in one of the books where they talked about the fact that they wanted to make sure that whatever it was stayed at room temperature. So even though it looked really hot, like if someone happened to go and touch it, like they wouldn't get burned.
Yep.
Like, I don't know if at some point it was going like, why don't we just use real lava?
There we go. There's the photo there. We'll have to,
there
we'll have to tweet
there
this
was
out.
something about how they used like phosphorescent materials in it, so that way
Yep.
it really looked like it was glowing. They went through all this effort, and I swear to God, I kept looking for that, and I never saw it the way that it was depicted in any of the books.
All right. So my ask of the community out there is, if you know anything about this dog food pump that was apparently repurposed to move the artificial lava, please let me know. I want to read that. I should go through some of the old articles from Central New Jersey at the time and see if I can find something, because that's where I believe she read it. So
The dog food pump.
that's right.
So while you're passing that, on your right, up ahead, is this fight between two dinosaurs. And most people assume that it is a Tyrannosaurus Rex fighting with a Stegosaurus, because that's what it looks like. But it doesn't quite look like a T-Rex, and there's a reason for that. So in the Fantasia movie, and in Disneyland, and in the World's Fair, there is a scene of a Stegosaurus fighting a Tyrannosaurus Rex. By the time they got around to doing Epcot, and there was a focus on accuracy both scientifically and historically, it was brought to their attention that those two particular dinosaurs did not coexist. They existed at different times, but did not coexist at the same time in history. So it would not have been possible for a Stegosaurus to have fought with a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So in the Epcot version, they have changed that to an Allosaurus. And that is the dinosaur that is fighting the Stegosaurus as you are heading into the final piece of the dinosaur show scene. But you just mentioned the colors of the dinosaurs after the refurbishment in 1996, and that again was a part of continuing research on dinosaurs. And if you remember, that refurb was done a few years after Jurassic Park came out. And the theory became that there was more of a focus on these dinosaurs being descendants of birds, and a belief that instead of having kind of gray and green skin, that they were more brightly colored and almost fluorescent in some cases. And so that was reflected in some of the redos of the dinosaurs that you see today. When they did the refurb, they repainted them to put spots and stripes and patterns on them and bright colors, and it always
looks
looks
so
a little
weird to me now.
It does.
It doesn't look right, if you ask me.
I mean, and that's just, I think, a function of us growing up with plain colored dinosaurs.
Well,
yeah,
let's be honest.
Gray.
Let's be honest.
Green.
None of us know what a friggin' dinosaur looks like. So just give us the gray and green ones that we're used to seeing. I don't need Joseph in the Technicolor dinosaur. You know,
when I was in just out of college, it's like I was working one of my first jobs, and as a gag, it's like one of the art director of the place like gave us all these little plastic dinosaurs, and you push a button, it would go roar and make this sound. And one of the explosion things on it that was like a selling feature said realistic dinosaur sounds, and I'm like, how do you know?
Yeah.
How does anybody know?
There was actually research done by Disney at the time for what, they thought, and again, based on all this fossil research and what they think that dinosaurs might have sounded like. So there's an attempt at accuracy, but right, you don't know. So before we roll into the final theater and out of this scene, and as I said, it's a 7-minute roll through all told. I have a request from the populace out here, because I loved dinosaurs from about kindergarten on, because we had a whole segment where they taught us about dinosaurs in kindergarten. And with it was another one of those 33 1/3 records where each dinosaur that and every week we learned about a new dinosaur. Well, every one of them had a song. So if any of you grew up in a elementary school where they had the letter people, where each week they taught you a different letter, and there were these inflatable letter people, and each of them had a different song. There's Mr. L and Mr. M and Miss A Atchewed, and Mr. M had a munching mouth. And I know there's people out there saying, oh my God, yeah, we had the letter people. Well, they did the same thing in kindergarten for us with dinosaurs. And when we got to the Tyrannosaurus Rex one, which of course, until the last 10 years, everybody thought was the meanest, baddest dinosaur that ever lived. And now they just keep finding new ones that were way badder than the Tyrannosaurus Rex. But it had a song, and they had a song for each one. I still remember to this day the Tyrannosaurus Rex song, which I'm going to sing for you, because I'm trying to find a listener who remembers this and had it in their school, or has a copy of it, or finds it for me on YouTube, because believe me, I've looked. And it was, Tyrannosaurus Rex was a real mean king. If it wasn't for him, we would have a happy ending. And then there was this giant bass drum that went boom, 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 boom.
Somebody was in kindergarten with their micro cassette recorder, just getting it. And
so if you remember that, that's my request from the Universe of Energy Dinosaur. It doesn't have anything to do with it, except it has as much to do with dinosaurs as dinosaurs do with the Universe of Energy.
That is true.
So who's taking us into the next theater? So after you've passed lava and a crazy snake dinosaur and a dinosaur fight in the parking lot, and then the last giant snail, you've seen enough dinosaurs. And also they were running out of building to move you through, because this diorama takes up the whole rear of the building. So when you look at the building and how it curves up, that giant show scene is really the back of the building. So you're about to hit the wall, and you're either going to blast through and be somewhere between Spaceship Earth and the Energy Exchange, or they need to make a left-hand turn. So you make a left-hand turn into Theater 2. Before we move on from this segment, I want to thank Jim Korkis and the All Ears newsletter for an article that he recently wrote on the dinosaurs in the Universe of Energy, just as we were getting ready to do this show. So instead of having to go and assemble my notes all in 12 different places, Jim happily provided an outline that we borrowed heavily from, and I wanted to acknowledge him before we move on.
Before we get into Theater 2, which we are going to raise another wall or lower another wall so that we can get in there. The big thing about these vehicles too was the fact that they ran autonomously. There was no track. So I want to give you guys a little information on how that all happened. Now, there was a wire that was embedded in the concrete. It was only an eighth. You'll hear all the time, it's only an eighth of an inch thick. People are like, wow, it's amazing. The interesting way how this worked is that really wasn't a wire in the sense that you think something's tracking it. The wire was actually an antenna for giving off radio frequency. And what would happen is the vehicle would be able to sense on the left and the right of that wire how strong the signal was. So if the sensor on the right-hand side of the vehicle got too close to the wire, the signal would become stronger and it would know to turn a little to the right. And the same thing for the left. So what the system was doing was, basically tuning itself to the radio frequency and making sure that both the left and the right receivers, if you will, were even. And if one got off, it just went the other way and kept itself balanced. Now, what's really interesting is that all these cars had to talk back, and they talk 60 times a second back to the main computer, telling, its function. But what they couldn't tell the main computer is where it was, in any place in the location in the attraction. So what would happen is that at certain locations, the main computer would know from location A to location B how long it should take the cars to get there. And when the cars got to that spot, there was basically a trigger on the floor that would tell it to say, "Hey, I'm here." And the computer would look at when it left area A and when it arrived at B, and if the time was within the tolerance, it allowed the ride to continue. If for some reason it never made it, it would issue a complete e-stop, an emergency stop. And basically that was quite a process. Apparently, most of the time they would do a full evacuation. Sometimes cast members would jump on the back of the vehicles, and there was a manual drive system, and they would have to. This kills me. The only way to reset the entire ride was to move all vehicles back to their home position, meaning all 12 vehicles had to be on one of the turntables in the 6-pack configuration, which is crazy. So you can imagine you got to get all these cast members in, or just the time to reset was really nuts. Sometime
sounds like the Truman Show. Back to home position, everybody.
That's right, get to the home position.
Or starting position.
So sometime in when Ellen came in around 2000, so the original guide wire system was abandoned. And, it does the same thing, but there's new advanced technology where there's these pucks or some sort of infrared or things that are spread around the pathway. And it's a little more, technologically forward. But really think about that, guys. This is, 1979, 1980. They're designing and coming up with this stuff. And this is probably some other, well, as we talked about, it was borrowed technology from warehouses. So, really, just amazing how they were able to do that. So the door opens up. We are now, remember, we're single file, and now we're going to go back to a regular 6-pack configuration. Now, we talked earlier about that they could run these, and 6-packs was the standard running, but they could run them in 5-pack configurations, where the center rear theater car was not in there. But apparently the system could not run with 2 5-packs. It's very, very strange the way it was built. But anyway.
Increase mirrors to 100% tracking.
Roger. Going on in 4 steps.
Moving to full load.
What's our expected output?
We'll have 10 megawatts here.
It's out there, everywhere. Much of the time pouring down on us like an endless rain.
Oil panel temperature.
Sometime in the next century.
So we come into Theater 2. Now there's not much in there, but when back in the original show when you arrived in, you would see these consoles and television screens and these maps with lines like Tron or even like a nuclear attack, right? There were these lines
like war
going,
games.
War games.
It's like your NORAD.
Yeah, exactly. These lines going across the maps like to cities, and it was really weird. But you were in what they call the Energy Information Center, and apparently these consoles and TV screens were supposed to be monitoring the current and future energy resources around the world.
It's really funny if you look at the concept art for this.
Yeah,
it looks like, the screens are in the front. It does. It looks like a NORAD war game.
Yeah,
thing, where the computer consoles are literally like wrapped around like one half of the circular theater.
Yeah,
and then when they actually built it, it was just like this tiny little pod like in front of the one screen. Not nearly as impressive, but.
And for some reason, I vaguely remember a cast member or somebody sitting behind like a glass wall or something like that. Do you remember that? There was a cast member in there, right?
There was a cast member there. And one of the things that we discovered in our research is not everything in the show was actually automated. It's like the cast member was pushing the button to like start and stop the turntable and raise and lower these walls, and there's actually like bits in their script that says like, oh, when the person says this, push the button to like start the turntable, and when the butterfly transforms into this thing, it's like push the button to like lower the wall between the two rooms. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's really amazing how sophisticated yet how primitive certain parts are. So we come in here. This is the theater 2. So obviously we're going to see a film. This is a additional 12.5-minute film. It was created under the direction of David Moore. And there are 3 massive 70 millimeter screens. Again, we can't stress this enough. Everything in this pavilion was huge, from the original pre-show to the first theater. Now the dinosaur backdrop was 500 feet long. These screens are 210 by 30 feet high. So
I'll preface this scene by saying you may have been bored, but you were bored big.
You were bored big. That's right, because with this 218-degree field of vision that was created, you're going to be placed right in the middle of the action, and we are going to go through all the parts of energy that we learned about in the pre-show. So, a little bit about how they made the film. They had some of these 3 different 70mm cameras. They were synchronized with each other. They had special mounting rigs and all these different special mirrors and to create a seamless image. And it's interesting. It was the only camera that was ever capable of shooting a continuous curve about 120 degrees. So we go into this film starts. We learned where fossil fuels originated, according to the script back then, and we are now prepared to see how all the different energy sources will meet our growing energy demands of the future. It starts and opens with the middle of a field of solar mirrors in a California desert. So back in the beginning of the show, we talked about the Bright Source power plant, and that's what this is. This was the early incarnation of the Bright Source power plant. So they talk about that. They go through oil extraction, discovering the new fields. They take you through the Mideast, waters of the North Sea, up in Alaska. And they're really doing a great job with this. I mean, they're putting the camera underwater. They're flying it around. The coal is really neat. They put you on they put the camera on a coal train, that goes through the veins, and you ride that. And they also talked about other additional essential fossil fuels. Specifically, the one that rocks, right, Hal?
That's right.
And we're just going to let the narrator tell us about one specific fossil fuel.
Oil shale, the rock that burns.
That was the super dramatic. That's the one quote I think that everybody takes.
Everybody knows
out
about
of that
oil
show.
shale. Yeah, I mean, it's just it was kind of cheesy, but
and ironically, it's like at the time it seemed like, well, that's ridiculous, but like now we have hydraulic fracking, and it's right. Actually a very pertinent, like timely energy source that we all use today.
Exactly, we can get that stuff.
Did they rehash any of this footage you're talking about on the current version? Because I remember like that solar field in the desert.
Yeah, I
feel like it looks similar.
I don't know if they ever. I'd have to go compare the films one to one, and they may have reused some segments from it. I mean, it was some of that footage is it's never going to go old. It's there's really no date that you can put on some of the stuff.
Like a lot of the Epcot films, like Symbiosis that we've talked about before, this thing was gorgeously shot. I mean, every frame is a work of art, individually. It is just beautiful.
I'll make another Jurassic Park reference, because in that John Hammond repeatedly says that he spared no expense. and this is one of those attractions in Epcot where they really spared no expense. I mean, everything was done almost unnecessarily well.
And we should mention too, this was the first attraction completely finished. Even in the early construction photos, this building is way far along.
Yeah, so we should I mean, obviously, Spaceship Earth had to be the shell needed to be constructed fairly quickly when they began vertical construction. But yeah, whenever you look at the pavilions, Energy and the World of Motion were the two that were kind of settled and under construction right away, along with Spaceship Earth and Future World. So you literally look at it because if you remember when we did the episode on the land, it had changed both sponsors and focus. So they were a little later getting started on that, although it was one of the ones that was completely finished and open on opening day. And so it's funny when you look at some of these things where Epcot is just a complete, dirt pad of frozen tundra that they're working on in the Florida swamps. You see the World of Motion, the almost complete Universe of Energy building, and Spaceship Earth, obviously mostly done without the exterior cover on it. But yeah, it's very, very early. Yeah, the building was done.
Yep. So we go on through synthetic fuels, geothermal, hydroelectric power, modern energy production, and they talk about nuclear energy with the possibility of fusion and stuff. They did make a prediction. I can't remember if it was in the film or if it was in the pre-show or somewhere else, but they predicted 25% of our energy would be nuclear within 2 decades. I did look up the actual. It was 11% in 2014, I believe. So not too bad. But and then it actually brings the rate back home again. You're in the universe of energy, and they specifically talk about the photovoltaic cells on the roof and how that your attraction today, you've been riding on sunshine through the universe of energy.
Which is the second most memorable line.
So the film concludes with a fantastic space shuttle launch scene.
10, 9, 8, ignition sequence start. Engines on. 5, 4, 3.
This is one of the very early space shuttle launches when they were still painting the external booster white. So we know it was, I think they only did that for 2-3 launches. So it's one of the very early ones.
I think they might have filmed the first launch. I'm trying to remember the details.
Was it the first of Columbia? So my recollection too, as I'm reading this, that NASA loved the footage they wanted, that they've never seen such a spectacular, panoramic shot. Now, what's interesting here is you've rotated. I believe you rotate while the towards the end of this film, as the shuttle launch completes and is lifted off to the sky, the entire screens actually lift up about 10 feet. Another door has opened, other curtains have risen, and the entire six-pack moves forward. And again, you're on a turntable that did all of its business that we talked about earlier. And you're going to move back into Theater 1 where you started the attraction some 40 minutes ago. All right, and so as we proceed into Theater 1, Universe of Energy song is played, which was written by Al Kasha and Joel Hirschhorn. And as we come into Theater 1, where as we said, you began your journey, there's a mix of computer animated and wireframe and really abstract but exciting and very moving type of image that is very projected in a very interesting way. Only about, what would you say, about 45 degrees, maybe 7 degrees total of the theater actually has screens. And then surrounding the right and left all the way through behind you are these mirrors. They're not perfectly round. They're kind of little funhouse-like, almost a little squiggly, if you will.
Yeah, they're probably like made out of plastic rather than glass.
Yeah.
I assume because we've seen those like sort of plastic-backed mirrors.
Right.
But yeah.
And this just gives the reflection of these two mirrored walls against each other. And remember, you're kind of, Theater 1 is wedge shaped. It gives you this idea of you're actually inside of a full circle, like you're inside of a donut. And there's also a half cylindrical apex screen at the very front, which projects a completely different image. And I don't know how to really describe the closing scene because it's abstract. There's a lot of fluidity and movement to it, and wireframe animations and baseball players. The bat becomes a telescope, and there's just a random person walking with a stick.
There's a lot of everything goes through this morphing cycle. The character as they're singing about these different things, it's like you see I think that thing that you mentioned is like when they talk about being future bound, and then like the baseball bat transforms into the telescope and the guy is looking for it. So this animation is constantly flowing and morphing from one shape to another, and it's basically sort of depicting what the song is singing about.
Yeah.
Hey, can we talk about who Alkosh and Joel Hirschhorn are, and why in the heck these two seemingly random people, wrote this song?
Yeah, and just one note before you get to that.
Sure. Go.
The film, according to Walt Disney's Epcot, which you referenced earlier, it was the largest computer animated film ever projected. Now, by largest, I don't know if they mean time, height, physical film.
It's very abstract.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but it was indeed, parts of it I thought were hand animated, but it was indeed all computer controlled or computer generated. So one of the earlier, I don't know if you'll call it a motion picture, being that it was only about 4 minutes, but it kind of interesting nonetheless. But tell us a little bit about the music.
Yeah. So when I first was going through our research here, and I saw these names, and like, who the heck are these people? Because we know that Bob Moline wrote a lot of songs. It's like we know about the Sherman Brothers, but like, who in the heck are these two random people? So what the first thing I discovered is that they wrote the song "The Morning After." The Academy Award-winning song "The Morning After" from the Poseidon Adventure. And they also wrote another song for the Towering Inferno that was also, I think, won an Academy Award.
So you're picking up the disaster movie theme here.
Yeah. I'm like, this pavilion's going to be a disaster. Who can write a song for this? But what the actual Disney connection turned out to be is they actually did work for Disney in the mid 70s, and so they wrote the song "I'd Like to Be You for a Day" for Freaky Friday, and they actually wrote all the songs for Pete's Dragon in 1977. So another 5 years rolls by, and they're looking for songwriters. They're like, oh well, these guys wrote the stuff for Pete's Dragon. That's good enough for us. Let's go talk to them. So that's how they got there. And the song was sung by John Joyce, who was an LA session singer. He'd been singing professionally since he was like 13 years old. He sang backup vocals for Elton John on tour. He's actually on Pink Floyd's The Wall album on the song "Goodbye Blue Sky," where he sings backup with Tony Tennille from The Captain and Tennille.
Captain and Tennille, yeah.
But he's on Frank Sinatra albums, Billy Joe albums, Jackson Browne albums. He was one of the foremost like session singers in LA for decades. And I think he's still maybe around and active, I think. So, but one of the things, Todd, that we wanted to talk about the mirror thing.
Yeah.
All those draperies that we talked about, the curtains, when you walked into the theater at the beginning, like all of that rises and gets out of the way. So now when you come into this room, you actually don't even know that was the same theater that you started out in. It looks completely different because of the mirrors.
As a kid, I could not figure out for the life of me the layout of this building. You know, it really took some blueprints and the mystery of having those, you know, gaudy silver curtains gone and just completely gone out of there. And the walls did their work. Any other black curtains did their work. And you really did know that you were back from where you started.
It is such a funny concept to say, like, oh, what can we do to like sort of amp up the show at the end, because we're really in the same room that we started out with. And so it was just like, just throw mirrors everywhere.
But it worked.
But it works, yeah.
It was really impressive. I can't recall how quickly after you started exiting the vehicles in the movie was done, whether or not you saw the curtains come down. You might have. I think towards the end they did.
I can't remember. I think when you exit it was mostly up. And there's a song on YouTube that's supposed to be the exit music. So it's about, I think, 6 minutes long in total. And the first 3 minutes is the universe, like a really neat arrangement of the universe of energy. And then about halfway through, it switches to energy you make the world go around. So I presume that 3 minutes would have been the time that you unloaded. And then once the cars were fully unloaded and those doors to the outside would close, and then the load doors would open up and the people would come in.
Right.
It's like, then you got the music from the previous show to like take you into that room.
So energy, you make the world go round. Brian had his plea to people for his dinosaur song. I'm going to throw out my plea. We already talked about it internally, but we're going to let the fans here and the followers and everybody take a listen, because I know what you guys think. So I think the lyrics have been changed. I think it was recorded twice, and energy, you make the world go round. Let's hear the acoustic demo version of that song.
Bringing our lives new graces.
What did you guys hear him say? Bringing our lives new
graces.
Graces. Okay, I agree. He says graces. Now let's hear the version from the attraction.
Bringing our lives new graces.
Okay, I hear something different. You guys still hear?
Graces.
All right, I hear braces. And my brother heard braces because he used to make fun of me every time in the attraction. He'd whip his head over and go, "You're wearing braces, dude."
I'm gonna look through the sheet music here because I have
the sheet music says graces, but I swear he says braces, and
We're going to call John Joyce up. We're going to call John Joyce and say, what did you sing? Our listeners,
that's right. What did you sing? So, because is the demo's Moline, right?
Yes.
The demo's Moline singing it. I want to know what our listeners think, and what have they thought all these years? Is it graces or braces? And I want to know. So write us in at podcast@RetroWDW.com. Title it Graces or Braces, and we'll see what the rest of you think. But
why would energy bring our life new braces?
Well, because it's bracing society. Why would it bring it graces? Oh, man. Well, as we exit, we are offered an additional look at energy that would take us over to the Energy Exchange, which we are going to talk about another episode, which is over in Communicore East. And there's another interesting tidbit. As you came out of the building, I don't know if you guys know this. Do you remember the trees next to the building between Spaceship Earth and Universe of Energy?
I remember they were like topiaried.
They were topiaries,
sort of cone-shaped, right?
Well, they were sculpted flat. They kind of had these haircuts, if you will, to match the rise and pitch of the side of the building, and they were right next to her. So this is kind of interesting. They were, I'm reading this from Birnbaum. They're pruned to follow the slanted roofline of the pavilion, and these trees were among a handful started from acorns from the Hotel Plaza Boulevard. That's the street that runs down the center of Hotel Plaza. Imagine that. That's over near Lake Buena Vista. For Walt Disney World's opening over a decade prior. A quartet of their siblings in an unpruned state can still be seen in front of the American Adventure in World Showcase. Now, this was 1986. I don't know if they're all still there anymore, but just kind of interesting fact that they took the trees from the boulevard, and that's where their offspring are located.
I think those all got replaced by palm trees at some point.
Did they? Yeah, I don't know if they were. Yeah. So the topiaries were pretty neat how they followed the contours. So we hope you have enjoyed your journey through the universe of energy, and appreciate you coming on for the ride this evening. All right, as always, we always have new merchandise and new designs coming out, and tees are our big thing recently. And how we were ahead this month. We created a shirt just for the universe of energy. Why don't you tell the folks what we've got? Because it's a brilliant one.
Yeah, we were going back and forth. I had wanted to do an oil shale, the rock that burns T-shirt for quite some time, and I couldn't wrap my head around how to do that. And so Todd and I were talking one day, and all of a sudden he kind of reminded me of I don't know. We started talking about concert T-shirts or something, And it occurred to me that oil shale you could kind of treat it like an AC/DC shirt. And so that's what we did. So we made sort of like a concert tee in the style of AC/DC that says oil shale up at the top, and then the rock that burns and that Times Roman typeface underneath it with like a nice big picture of oil shale on fire right in the middle.
And it's the Future World Tour, right?
Yeah, that's right. The 1982 Future World Tour.
Future World Tour. So that's a great shirt. So you can definitely get that. So as always, we've got all the different tees. We have another one added in for our event, which we'll talk about. Our event is called Looking Back at Tomorrow. So there's some great shirts that How designed for that. You got another one in the mix coming up soon, How, you think? Or
I think, energy is endless and untapped. So certainly there's more where that one came from.
So you have potential energy.
That's right. Absolutely.
You'll bring those into the mix. So as always, you can check out our merchandise at RetroWDW.com/support us. All right, so let's talk about, we're going to make a real quick mention of our event here. Brian, you and I did a quick episode, 31.35, that we released a couple weeks ago, that went into some of the details of our event that we're hosting at Epcot, and specifically we've announced that it's at the Living Seas Pavilion, and tickets went fast.
Let's thank everybody. We sold 100 tickets the first hour. We sold the allotment that we had within the first week, so it's officially sold out with a waiting list there to try to slip a few more folks in once we work out capacity issues. But you guys, the first, and JT and I told this story on another podcast yesterday, so I think we can share it with everybody. We had originally reserved the Norway loft, which is a small facility because we never know how many of you there are out there that would want to come and have some birthday cake in behalf of Epcot Center with us. But that ticket sales, you guys moved us out of the Norway loft in the first hour.
Yeah,
over to
didn't take long.
No, it didn't take long.
We had to scramble to do some more paperwork to get
and the truth of it is, if Epcot had a bigger facility for us, we'd be in a bigger facility than even the Living Seas, but that's all they have.
The timing right now with the Odyssey probably would have been our first choice, and probably would have held more than the Seas, and that's tied up with food and wine. A lot of things are tied up with food and wine as a result. So the event, you can see all the details at RetroWDW.com/Epcot35. But we're welcoming Disney legend Tom Nabby is going to be joining us. We have an autograph session with him. Everybody's going to be receiving a signed photo from Tom, as well as one of his Disney legend window pins. Special.
And we have a schedule and merchandise.
Right.
Actually published like months before the event.
Yeah, we're ahead of that.
It's impossible. How could anybody possibly?
It's a big deal.
How can four guys possibly do
crazy.
that?
We're selling merchandise. We got everything going. We do have a character greeting scheduled. It's a rare Epcot character, and will be really interesting, and it should be great to have the character there with us. We're going to have presentations of never before seen private films of Epcot Center, and another film that has not been in circulation since 1983. We'll have some different memorabilia and artifacts. We got some light refreshments and snacks. One of the big things, I know one person said, "That's why we're coming. You had me at the cake." So we are going to have an edible recreation of Epcot's historic birthday cakes. And I can assure you it is not going to be a replica of the cake that was in the Living Seas made out of tuna and coral. So we're not going to be bringing that one up. And then we have, as Brian has coined it, the coolest retro Epcot gift on the planet will be given out to exclusive to all the attendees of this event. And let me just tell you, I've been working on it.
So exclusive that that Hal and JT don't know what it is,
and
we're not telling them.
Yeah,
I can't. I hope I get one. That's really my only wish.
We'll have a private
buy a ticket, buddy.
So it has been kept under very, very tight wraps. It is going to be a really, really unique gift. We've been working on it. In fact, when I'm done recording this here, I've got to get some work done on it as well. But it's going to be nothing short of awesome.
I think we can tell them, though, we had to get Disney's permission to make it.
Yeah, we got and we asked, and they actually said, yeah, you can do that.
Huh.
So if you weren't one of those to get tickets, we do have a wait list, as Brian pointed out. You can email your name, the total number in your party to podcast@RetroWDW.com. Just ask to be put on the wait list. We do not know if we're going to be able to release any additional tickets. We know what our top maximum number is for the venue. We know where we're at now. We've got a couple of other things to plan and figure out. If we can, a few weeks before the event, we'll release those. But keep following us, and I hope we can get anybody that's on the wait list in. I think there might be more than spots available, but who knows? Yeah. We'll figure it out.
But for those of you who are going to be on property that weekend, we had talked about doing some kind of free walking tour or meetup. Now that we've seen the rough schedule for D23's event on Sunday, October 1st, the actual anniversary, we will be there. There will be some kind of a meetup between when that event ends at 2:30 in the afternoon and when our nighttime obligations begin. So sometime mid to late afternoon, there will be some kind of a get-together with all of us somewhere in future world.
And we did decide today, too, we are going to make, we had the corrugated wall album cover that we made at the last get-together, the four of us. We do have a location, and we are going to be making a new album cover specifically for this event. So you can keep your eyes peeled after, early October, you'll see that come out. So we're looking forward to that.
Well, it'll be on our walking tour meetup for sure. So
absolutely.
People might actually
we won't let them
take
know
the picture. People might actually get to see us take the picture.
But we'll get that out. So again, thank you to everybody who purchased the tickets. We really appreciate it. We're humbled by the response, and we're a lot of people. Hopefully, you just all want to come see us. Maybe, I don't know, but
and we're really looking forward to meeting all of you. I
Absolutely.
mean, some of you we've probably met at other things, but I'm fascinated to see who would actually want to listen to us go on for an hour and a half on a monthly basis, and we're thankful that you do that, and we're really looking forward to meeting you in person.
Absolutely. And what's really nice about this is because part of the time, and we will publish more of a timely schedule as we get close to what the full 2 hours are going to entail. But there will be some time for just, mingling and saying hello to you. We didn't really have that experience when we did the Lake and Lagoon tour. And it was a little rushed. Get on the pontoon boat now. We're taking on water. Everybody to the back. If we ever did that again, I think now Brian and I have been working very closely with Disney Event Planning. They've been awesome to work with. It's taken us a little time, but they've been really good in working with us. We have another call scheduled next week to go over some of the catering details. But I think now they know who we are. We know who they are. And I think if we ever did the Lake and Lagoon tour, we could probably work with them to get something bigger where we can all be together too. So, all right, guys. Well, that takes us to the end of this episode. We do need to figure out where we are going next month. We had a couple options on the table. I know, we talked about, we bumped Journey into Imagination because of Universe of Energy. So do we want to stay true and continue with Journey? Do we want to go to our next stop, which was going to be Retro Food? Do we want to get out of Epcot for a little bit? What do we think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little hungry. I don't know about you guys.
All right. I eternally can eat,
Well, why don't we do that then? Let's take a trip down a food lane next month. We will. I will dig out the Flagler menu. I know, Brian, you've got a certain dine-in menu and a couple others that you've been researching.
I think that this is the point where we can make an initial call for those of you who've hung with us through this entire episode and are still listening. Since we'll be focusing on menus of the past and maybe some restaurants of the past and things like that, if you happen to have a menu from a Walt Disney World property restaurant from the 70s, 80s, or we'll say 90s. I think we'll cut it off at the millennium. But if you've got one and you can scan it in and send it to us, one of the things that we're building, and as we get into this episode, is an archive to share on our website of some of these menus. And I've certainly been collecting them online and buying them and scanning them, and so that we can preserve some of them. So if you happen to have one and can email it over to us or tell us what you've got and see if we're interested in it, we would love to have it. We really want to get a full page. And Todd, we can't end this episode without thanking all of the people who sent us pictures of themselves.
That's right.
In the at the photo opportunity on the train platform and in downtown Disney. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about that?
That's right. So a couple episodes ago, I'm trying to think about when this was, but we had talked about the photo op that used to be in the Magic Kingdom. It was in the photo center, which is now where the confectionery is on the right-hand side, just as you're starting to go down Main Street. That was the Kodak Photo Center, and in the back they had a mock-up of the very end of a Walt Disney World railroad car, and you would dress up in period garb from the turn of the century, and they would take your photo there. And we had talked about it, and we weren't getting any response, but for some reason, all of a sudden, somebody sent us one photo. We tweeted it out, and before you knew it, we had a flood of pictures coming in from this photo op. In fact, we even received from other photo areas in the Magic in Walt Disney World that they had over time. So we have assembled them all together. If you go to our website and go into the pictorial souvenir inside Magic Kingdom, you're going to see a link for the camera center. And if you go in there, and we'll post a link on the show notes as well, you've got a bunch of family photos, all taken with the rear of the train from the camera center. What's really interesting is you'll see the repeat of the outfits from one person to another. Like in one photo, the two parents are wearing the same exact thing that my parents are wearing. So you'll see mine, the McCartney family from New Jersey, and mine's pretty funny actually. I got a great tweet back from somebody, and they said, "You look like the kids from Back to the Future. You look like Jules and Vern when when Doc comes back." So take a look at that one and tell me what you think. But super, thank you to everybody. We've got the Sweetos, the Veteranos, Murrays, Moores, Graves, Scarillos, Biggs, Buck.
Yeah, on the train.
Family. Thank you all so much for sending those in. And a few of them started sending ones in from the pirate photo as well that was done in Pirates of the Caribbean, and we also started to get some.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that one?
Yeah.
So we're going to put a feeler out for that one, so if you've got it, send it to us. And the other one that we also have, that there's not as many as these. This was over in at the marketplace, and it was a turn-of-the-century type photo as well, but it was just basically with wallpaper behind you. But those are out there, and I found mine as well. So we'll get those scanned in as they come in. So if you've got them, send them in to podcast@RetroWDW.com. All right, guys, with that, I think it's time to close out this month. I'm out of energy. It's getting late. So a big thank you, as always, to our listeners. We appreciate everything you send in, all your photos and stories and emails and tweets and quips and quotes. Just tonight, we saw somebody else had made their way to the corrugated wall. So congratulations. We might need to get like a pin. I found the wall. I found the corrugated wall and hand it out when people. What do you think, guys? Should we do something like that?
Yeah. Making a corrugated wall pin would be like the fastest probably design job that I ever did.
You got 30 minutes. Get it to me. I want to.
Yeah, it's just some lines and bronze,
exactly.
Or that like beige color. With,
No, I want it made out of the corrugated material.
There we go. We're just at the bottom. I found it. Corrugated wall. Yeah. So, all right. Who knows? Maybe we'll kick that off. But again, thanks so much for all your questions and comments coming in. Appreciate you listening. If you can, give us a shout out and a review on iTunes or Google Play. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you next month. And with that, Brian, take us out.
Follow Todd McCartney and RetroWDW on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at RetroWDW. For all things Retro Disney World, including exclusive merchandise, visit us on the web at RetroWDW.com. On Twitter, follow our web designer Jason Bartell of Deepwater Studios at JasonDWS, our announcer Andre Gardner at Andre Gardner, and follow our hosts Hal Bowers on Twitter and Instagram at GoAwayGreen, and on the web at kingdomofmemories.com. For JT Cougar on Twitter at LS1JT, on YouTube at Rubber City Motoring, and on the web at rubbercitymotoring.com. And you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Brian P. Miles.